Rural Americans deserve access to the best of what our nation has to offer, especially healthcare. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families healthy. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care.
Let the Record Show with Judge Richard Weinberg, Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia, and essayist and commentator Eric Levine on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the Vice Chair of the New York State Republican Party and the County Chair of the Suffolk County Party. With us is our co-host, noted attorney, commentator, essayist, Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg, and we're absolutely delighted to have with us the chairwoman of the United States House of Representatives Rules Committee, one of the most powerful committees, important committees in the Congress. Congresswoman Foxx is a doctorate in education. She was president of a college. She was chair of the Education Committee in the House. She's one of the leaders of the Republican Conference. And we're absolutely delighted. I have on very good authority that Congresswoman Foxx was born and bred in New York, and you'll hear, as soon as you hear her, you'll know that she still has her New York accent. Congresswoman Foxx, you want to make an introductory statement before I turn you over to that searing cross-examination of Eric and Jesse?
That would be great. I do, in my first campaign for Congress, one of my opponents was pointing out that I was born in New York to try to undermine me. And then I found out later he was born in New York. That's how it works in politics. I tell everybody I was born in New York because you have to be where your mother is when you're born, right?
Generally, it works as a general matter. I'll take judicial notice of that, yes.
Right. My mother grew up as an extremely poor person in the mountains of North Carolina, in the Appalachian Mountains. Her father was a coal miner in Grundy, West Virginia. She was born there, but when she was 8 years old, he died. And her mother and her sisters were destitute, so they moved to the mountains in North Carolina where my mother had an aunt living. I mean, it was 1930 in the depths of the Depression, and honestly, they would have starved to death if they hadn't had a family to come to. But she had no skills, although she was a very bright woman. I shouldn't say she had no skills. She had lots of skills. They just weren't very marketable skills. So when she was like 18, her sister and brother-in-law, who had gone to New York from the mountains of North Carolina and were running a restaurant in Brooklyn, by the way, Eric, brought my mother there to babysit with their 1, 2, and 3-year-olds while they worked restaurants long hours during World War II. And she met my dad there. His parents were Italian immigrants, came to the United States and settled in New York in 1906, 1907. Did not know each other, but met each other there. My grandmother's name was Conchetta Ashoni. My grandfather just had a simple Italian name, Frank Palmieri. And then my father, who was the eldest in the family, he was named Nunzio. He had a brother named Pasquale, and there was Raimondo. This typical Italian names: Tilly, Josephine, Mary. All the Italian names. So I was born in New York, and then when I was 6.5 years old, my parents moved to North Carolina. Now, their reason for moving is a little questionable, but we lived in the backwoods of North Carolina, again, extremely poor down here, very, very poor. My father had to work away from home and because there were no jobs in the area, but they were near my mother's family, again, because I had an aunt who lived in the area. So it's kind of the way poor Appalachian people have always worked. But I grew up here, then graduated from high school and went to college as a day student one semester. Didn't have any money. My parents still had not much money, and they had moved away when I graduated from high school. And so my grandparents were still living in the Bronx, on Middletown Road across from Pelham Bay Park.
Well, if anybody were to ask me, listening to you, I would have said, clearly this woman is from the South Bronx.
That's what
right,
started.
Exactly.
All right. Eric, time for your searing cross-examination.
So I want to remind people, this is a wonderful biography, but this is a wonderful biography of a wonderful woman. Just to remind people who Virginia Foxx really is in her core. We all remember the Kafir Nazis at Columbia University, as they were protesting Israel's right to exist and Jewish students' right to exist at Columbia. While Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries were in the witness protection program hiding, and Zora Mamdani was cheering them on, Speaker Mike Johnson, Congressman Mike Lawler, and Congresswoman Virginia Foxx had the courage of their convictions and went to Columbia and told these students and told Columbia University that the anti-Semitism had to stop. So while people listen to Virginia Foxx and they say, wow, what a wonderful, nice woman, this woman has character and is tough as nails. And as an American Jew and as a New Yorker, Virginia, I want to thank you for that effort. It was very important.
Well, having grown up poor in the mountains of North Carolina made me tough.
There you go.
And I believe in doing the right things for the right reasons. And I will tell you, many years ago, I was working for Governor Jim Martin in Raleigh, and I had a man working for me who was an organizational specialist. And I'd been there about 2 months, and I said to him, what do people say about me behind my back? He said, they say you have a heightened sense of justice.
And that sounds like you're from the South Bronx.
That's right. And I think that is one of the nicest things anybody could say about a person in elected office. Now, because I grew up poor, I've always believed in the power of education and hard work. And so my goal has always been to help as many people as I can who are willing to work hard to get a great education and be able to succeed in this country. If a person like I and my husband, whose traces his heritage back many generations in the mountains of North Carolina, if the two of us could succeed, my belief is anybody in this country can succeed with hard work and a good education.
Well,
but you have to be treated fairly.
But to talk about people who do not necessarily believe that people should work real hard, let's talk about the partial government shutdown, which makes absolutely no sense to me. So it's been forced upon us by the Democrats, it appears, that there'll be a shutdown of the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, because the Democrats believe that ICE is out of control. But the problem is, as I understand it, that ICE is already fully funded through 2029 or 2030, and that the shutdown, the closing of DHS, the non-funding of DHS, really impacts principally FEMA and the
Correct.
TSA.
And the Coast Guard.
Correct.
And the Coast Guard. So
Correct.
as someone from North Carolina who is still reeling from those storms, I mean, I understand Asheville still has never been the same. Can you explain to me what the rationale is behind this government shutdown, or what Democrats are, privately are telling you as to why they're doing this?
They can't really delineate it except to say that they're unhappy about what happened in Minneapolis, and this is the only tool available to express their unhappiness. But obviously, it is affecting these other agencies. You know, a lot of people thought it was crazy when, under President Bush, they put all these disparate agencies under the Department of Homeland Security, and I feel the same way. But it is incomprehensible. Now, I saw something today in the news that said Hakeem Jeffries wants to talk next week when we're back in town about what might be able to be done to open the government again. They took a real beating over the closing down of the government last year for 43 days or something, longest government shutdown ever. And I think they're probably beginning to feel it again. Most Americans aren't being touched by this because they're not flying or they're not in the Coast Guard. But FEMA is still operating, and we need the help of FEMA. I mean, they're still there, and they're need to be helping people. I checked with my office this morning. We still have open cases from what happened a year and a half ago with Hurricane Helene. And, of course, there are problems all over the country where we need FEMA's help.
Yeah, so I mean, how far along is the recovery in North Carolina from the hurricane?
Well, when it happened, we estimated it would take 10 years. And you can drive around and see many, many, many trees down all around. As I said, we still have cases open from a year and a half ago. Mostly roads are going to need to continue to be rebuilt, water systems that were washed out, rivers that got over their banks, and we need stream restoration. They're just things that are going to go on forever. And this is not something that is going to be taken care of. We had people who lived in their homes for 50, 60 years. My husband and I had classmates from high school who had, built their own homes, lived in them, paid for them a long time ago, wiped out, and maybe the house was worth $400,000. They got $43,000.
Tragic.
From FEMA. That's all. You can't be 75, 80 years old and start all over again like that.
Yeah, so in the Democrats' infinite wisdom, let's shut it down so these people can continue to suffer. It's crazy.
Right.
So
exactly.
So I'd like to just shift gears for a second. So this past week, Secretary of State Marco Rubio gave what I would describe as a tour de force in addressing some of our European allies, in particular his emphasis on our shared past and future in Western civilization. And one of your colleagues, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in response to his speech, which got a standing ovation from our allies, by the way.
Rubio's speech,
made the following comment, that Rubio's speech was, quote, a pure appeal to Western culture, close quote. Am I missing something? Don't we live in Western civilization?
Yes, yeah, of course. And we are the greatest country in the history of the world. We have done more good for the rest of the world, but Western civilization has done more good next to us, and obviously we come out of Western civilization. Our earliest immigrants here were from Europe, mostly from England, Scotland, those countries, Ireland, and they brought with them culture, Western culture. They brought freedom of religion. They brought capitalism. They brought many things with them that have spread now all across the world and have made the world a better place. What has brought the most people out of abject poverty has been capitalism. What has brought people out of disease-ridden places has been what we have done, scientific exploration, scientific achievements coming out of Western civilization. She's not very, very bright. Senator Kennedy has the best comments about her. I'm not as smart and as witty as he is, but he has some great things that he says about her. But I'll leave it to her herself to condemn herself with her comments.
Well, I mean, when she was asked about American policy vis-a-vis Taiwan, she responded, now try and follow me here, folks, quote, I think that this is such a, I think that this is this is, of course, a very long-standing policy of the United States. And I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point, and we want to make sure that we are moving in all of our economic research in all our global positions to avoid any such confrontation, and for that question to even arise, close quote. So I guess my question would be...
What does that mean?
And you partially answered it, is she as big an idiot in private as she is publicly?
Well, I have to say, I don't have any conversations with her.
Well, what can you say to something like this?
You'd like... All right. Congresswoman, I'm turning it over to Jessie Garcia, who definitely doesn't do ums and ahs and whatevers. Jessie.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, and having your heart belong to New York, as you said when you did your introduction there. First and foremost, I as the chair of the Rules Committee, do you think that you can play AOC's comments in Munich every time a Democrat speaks about some of their socialist policies, just to demonstrate how dumb they are, and maybe shut them down a little bit easier? But what I want to speak to you is about actually two things. One more about first, maybe in the realm of your former chair that you had under education, and then the other one about the Epstein files. First, in your former role, when you served as the chair of the Education Committee, the Republicans seem to always have been innovators and have always moved forward in trying to increase more of resources into the classroom, place an emphasis more on education, it seems. And the Democrats, which is their response to everything, is simply just feeding the union beast. Yet we get a bad tag about it. Can you speak of how maybe we're missing the boat there, or how the American people, New Yorkers specifically, are missing the boat there, that Republicans truly are trying to move forward, advancing the ball on education for our younger folks?
Well, I always make sure that I explain to people that I'm a constitutional conservative. And I always, when I'm speaking to a group in person, I will hold up my pocket copy of the Constitution, and I will say, if you can find the word education in here as a responsibility of the federal government, I'll chew it up, and, I'll eat it. The role of the education is not a responsibility of the federal government. And so what Republicans are always trying to do is push down decision-making to the local and state level. I knew when I became chair of the committee that I did not have the power to get the federal government out of education. I would have loved to have done that, but I couldn't. And what Secretary McMahon is doing now is looking for every way that she possibly can to reduce the role of the federal government. And so is the chair of the Education Committee. We will always do that as Republicans, unless we have rhinos, of course, who don't understand that. But that's what we're trying to do. And so many things have been pushed out to other departments. The real key will be when we eliminate any kind of responsibility to the federal government from the states and localities, because they have no responsibility unless it is always tied to money. That's how the Democrats over the years have forced the localities and states to be involved. I was on the committee, not chair of the committee, when President Obama got Obamacare passed. And what Obamacare did was it it was funded by the federal government picking up 100% of the student loan programs. Now, you want to talk about a debacle. That is a number one debacle, and that got the federal government more involved in education than anything else that has ever happened in education.
Well,
Thank you for that. I want to just turn
Go ahead,
to
Jesse.
possibly the Epstein file. Oh, I'm sorry, Judge. Would you like to think?
I think you're doing a great job, Jesse. I yield my, as we say in Congress, I yield my time to you and the Congresswoman.
I just want to turn my your attention a little bit to the Epstein files, and there's been a lot of hoopla going on and whatnot. And finally, the legislation has been passed, and evidently all the documents have been released from the Department of Justice. Just one observation, and to get your comments on, and maybe then a question. Number one, my first observation is that the Democrats are pushing this because they thought it was going to spill back on the President Trump. Obviously, it's done nothing of that. In fact, even Democrat consultants have been saying that, when is the casualty list is immeasurable now when it comes to the Democrats being caught up in the release of these Epstein files. And it really has almost exonerated President Trump. So my question is, what are your thoughts on that, on the fact that the release of the Epstein files has hurt the Democratic brand more than anything else? And number two, why not release these during the course of the Biden administration?
Well, now, the answer to that question is one of the mysteries of the world. Why didn't the Democrats push? Because of what you said exactly. They thought that this would have a splashback on President Trump, and it has not. So that's something they absolutely will not answer. I defy you to get a Democrat to answer why they didn't push to do this under President Biden. They didn't make a sound about it under President Biden. And so the only thing you can respond to that is that they did think it was going to hurt President Trump. It's just like, why do they fight having a picture ID to go vote? It makes no sense. It's another one of those imponderables that we can't ever get an answer on. So, yeah, I don't know. And on the Epstein files in general, I was one of those people, although we had some convoluted votes that maybe make people think I didn't feel this way, but I have always felt from the beginning, put it all out there as quickly as you can. I am a huge believer in transparency in all things. Count me as naive, but again, I have a heightened sense of justice. My sense is you put everything out there, and if there's anything that's wrong, then you deal with it. But don't try to hide things, especially, I mean, there are at least two lawyers here on this show today, and isn't it best always to know what you're doing? Don't you always want to know the answer before you put things out? Or ask a question. That's what I've always been told about.
Well, the fact that we always would like to know what we're doing doesn't mean that we do know what we're doing.
Or as we say in our business, Madam Chair,
we pretend.
That's assuming facts, not in evidence.
Well, the Democrats obviously didn't have much information about what was in the Epstein files if they thought, again, all the blowout was going to be against President Trump, because that's what they fought for after he got elected again. But I've always been in favor of transparency wherever we are. I think money that we spend in Washington, there ought to be lots of transparency. I hated the Arctic frost issue. I'll bring that up. You all haven't brought it up as an issue where the senators were going to pay themselves for being spied on by the Bidens. Most of the House and Democrat members wanted that done away with. I'm the one, by the way, who put the amendment in on the last appropriations bill that stopped that. I'm a big believer in doing the right things for the right reasons.
Well, Congresswoman, Madam Chair, Virginia Foxx, chair of the Rules Committee, a great leader in the United States Congress, a great leader of the Republican Conference. Chairman Jesse Garcia, Eric Levine, and I are absolutely delighted that you shared some of your very valuable time with us today. We look forward to having you back on the show as things develop in this very important calendar year with the midterms coming up. And I want to say to you, God bless you for all your great work, for your courage, for your integrity, your human decency. Having you in Congress makes me feel a lot better about the future of this country. And thank you for joining us on this week's Let the Record Show. Thank you very, very much.
Well, and thank you very much for having me. And please keep on with this show because it's very important to the American people.
Well, thank you. We
Thanks
appreciate
again.
that.
Rural Americans deserve access to the best of what our nation has to offer, especially health care. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families healthy. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care.
Rural Americans deserve access to the best our nation has to offer, especially when it comes to health care. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families' health. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care. Rural Americans deserve access to the best our nation has to offer, especially when it comes to health care. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families' health. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care.
Let the Record Show with Judge Richard Weinberg,
Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia,
and essayist and commentator Eric Levine on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the Vice Chair of the State Republican Party and the County Chair of the Suffolk Party. With us is our co-host, noted attorney, commentator, and essayist Eric Levine, and I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. And we had the honor and privilege of having Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, Chairman of the United States House of Representatives Rules Committee, one of the most important committees in the Congress. Jesse and I know that, both having worked in Congress. Nothing gets on the floor. Nothing gets debated. Time is allotted based on getting out of the Rules Committee. If you don't get out of the Rules Committee, it doesn't get to the floor of the House of Representatives. It's as simple and as complicated as that. She's a very powerful woman, a brilliant woman. She has a doctorate in education. She was president of a college, a woman of real courage, integrity, decency. And we were just delighted to have her with us this week. So, gentlemen, what I want to talk to you about is the new preliminary budget proposed. This is the first budget gambit officially that the mayor, Mondami, has proposed. And just as a quick primer for everyone on how the budget process works in New York City, the mayor makes a preliminary budget proposal, lays out where he wants to spend the money, how much revenues he needs. Then the city council has hearings on the preliminary budget. After the preliminary budget hearings are over, the mayor comes back and he submits his formal budget. Then there are committee hearings on the formal budget, and then there are negotiations. They have to adopt by the end of June, because that's the fiscal year ending. They have to then have a budget in place, and under both the municipal home rule law of the state of New York as well as under the New York State Charter, the budget has to be balanced. That means expenses cannot exceed revenues. It's totally unacceptable. It doesn't happen that way. So it has to be a balanced budget. So, Mondami, so what did he do? He says he doesn't have enough money. He has a shortfall about $5 to $7 billion. Hasn't stopped him from proposing some very extraordinary expenses, such as free buses. What other great ideas does he have? Childhood education for everybody, building all kinds of housing.
We're all for educating our children.
Right, of course, but I'm all for that. The question is,
I checked.
But the question is, you have to spend your money wisely and efficiently. He's now talking about cutting the police department. They hired Adams was in the process of hiring another 5,000, which you need both for the reality and perception of public safety. He wants to cut the police budget, which is always foolish and dangerous. He's trying to say to the governor, who he is now endorsed, and the governor had earlier endorsed him, said, look, I don't want to do it, but what I'm going to say is if I don't get my proposal, my request, my demand for a tax on the wealthy, the millionaires and the billionaires, I'm going to have to raise the real property tax to 9.5%. Yeah. So let me be very clear about this. Under state law, and under our city charter in New York, the only tax that the city government can do on its own is the real property tax. So all other taxes, income taxes, corporate taxes, sales taxes, hotel taxes, commuter taxes, they all have to come through the state legislature and the governor. So he needs to get that money out of Albany, and he's trying to blackmail Hochul into doing that. Otherwise, he says, I'm going to adopt this 9.5 tax. This 9.5 real property tax, to her credit, the Speaker of the City Council, Julie Menon, and the Chair of the Finance Committee in the Council both said this is a no-go. They're not going to do that. Why? Because they have enough common sense and experience to know that if you raise those taxes, a lot of people, small property owners, are going to go under. They also know.
But that's the idea.
Well, I understand that's the socialist idea, and his czar for housing does exactly that, and she's been quoted at doing that. They want to have a takeover of local housing by the government. That's worked out so well with the housing authority, hasn't it? Which is the biggest disaster in the world.
Well, there's this general visceral opposition to private property. And the Mamdanis of the world believe that homes and housing is strictly for the government to take care of. There should be no private housing. Everything should be run by the government, and that this is part of that effort for the government, for the city initially, to take over the housing in New York. That's how the Democrats or the Democratic Socialists work. This is how they want to wipe out private ownership. But you talk about some of the spending. I mean, the idea is when you look at these budgets, there are two things you can do if you want to balance a budget. You can either increase revenue or you reduce spending. And at some point, you can't keep increasing revenue by raising taxes because, as we all know, people will leave. We're seeing that in New York. But you want to cut spending. But for people like Mamdani, he is not about governing. That's what people need to understand. He's not about governing. He's about revolution. He is about bringing socialism and communism to New York City. then New York State, and then eventually the entire country. So for him, it's to turn the United New York into a socialist dystopia. One man's dystopia is another man's utopia. But as you point out, Richard, he wants to raise the income tax on everyone who earns over $1 million a year by 2%. Even if you think that's fair, and it's not, because the people who earn over 1%, the top 1% pay 40% of the taxes. But even if you think that's fair, these are the same people that are just going to leave. So the minimum tax is not 8%, 10%, 15%. It's zero. The minimum tax is zero because those people will leave and pay no tax. And then the 9.5% tax is, he's perfectly happy to impose the real estate tax because, as we were just pointing out, it's all about turning private property over to government. But the biggest piece of the government budget is education. Now, the roles of students in our New York City public schools have been going down. The performance of our students in the New York City public schools has been going down. New York City pays something like $35,000 a year per student, one of the highest, if not the highest, in the country.
And we're towards the bottom of the list.
Exactly.
Accomplishment.
The states of Mississippi and Alabama, which pay a fraction of what we per student as to what we pay, are outperforming New York City students in the public schools. And yet he still wants to increase the budget, even though there are empty classrooms, there are half-empty buildings, but he wants to raise the budget for education. Why? Not to put the money into the classroom to improve the educational system for our children, but so that unions have better benefits and better pensions. That's money that's not spent on the kids, educating the kids. That's just spent on union members who can now go into retirement with these wonderful pensions. And don't forget about pensions.
The overbloated bureaucracy in the Department of Education as well.
Yeah, well, the DEI programs administrators alone in the New York City public schools, you can save tens of millions of dollars if he just acts that out. But what was interesting, I think, Richard, you were saying that he's been hitting some roadblocks even amongst Democratic officials in the city council or across the state. But the quote that really captures me, and I forgot who said it, but it was basically, he wants to raise taxes, quote unquote, in an election year. The implication of that is, just wait, we'll do it next year. We won't raise it this year because we're in an election year, people won't like it, but we'll do it next year. So the problem, but we don't, even those people that want to or are opposed to raising taxes, you never hear that they want to cut the budget. But the only time they ever want to cut the budget is when you look at the police department, which is the one department that actually should be enhanced. We need more police officers because the communities that benefit the most from public safety are minority communities that live in the highest crime areas. And still, these are the communities that are going to be punished as he rolls back police, as he has more social workers taking over the roles of police officers. Look, the Mamdani budget is all about how the Democratic Socialists have crawled into the dead carcass of the Democratic Party and how they want to have a revolution in the country as opposed to governing in the city. So when AOC, going back to our last segment with Congresswoman Foxx, talks about how Western civilization is something horrible, this is really part and parcel of that. The Democratic Socialists don't view the United States, Western civilization, which is based on the Judeo-Christian ethic, as something positive. They view it as something evil that needs to be replaced. And replaced by what? A socialist dystopia that has failed everywhere, every time it's ever been tried. And yet, and still, they want to bring it. They want to bring Cuba and Venezuela and China and North Korea and all those other wonderful places to the Hudson. I don't get it. And unless and until New York City voters wake up, or more nationally, American voters wake up to who the DSA is and what the Democratic Party has turned into, this is the direction we're going to head. And they're not shy about it. They're public about it. This is where they want to bring us.
Jesse, your thoughts?
I just want to bring a couple more points to that Eric pointed out and yourself pointed out, Your Honor, for the listeners here throughout New York, because New York taxpayers should be scared here because what we're seeing here in New York City is what Democrats in Albany all want to do to all throughout the state of New York. Number one, here's the thing with Mandami's budget. It demonstrates that he is inexperienced and does not know what he's doing.
I think he's selling him short. I think he knows exactly what he's doing. I understand what you're
Chairman Garcia has the floor, Mr. Levine. Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
He's just trying to get me from the locker room stuff. But just to buckle down, there's a $12 billion 2-year, 3-year structural deficit in this budget, in New York City's budget. Why is that there? It's there fueled because this city is a sanctuary city and opened up its doors to a flood. Millions of undocumented migrants, mostly with criminal records or with mental health issues, that were given from the city of New York and the state of New York. They were given free housing, free health care, debit cards for them to be able to buy their groceries. This is a clear demonstration, and we talked about this, about bringing Venezuela and Cuba to New York City, bring Venezuela and Cuba to New York State, and the country is what they're trying to do. And it demonstrates that every progressive leader always demonstrates the failure of socialism when they promise free services only to force taxpayers to pay for them later on. And the other issue that we're dealing here is that this budget, if you look at it, and it came across the 2025-26 budget for Florida, which is a state. It's got a higher population than the city of New York. That is about $117.5 billion. This proposed budget for 8 million people in the city of New York to fund failed policies, to fund failed attempts to give free busing and such in grocery stores to individuals is $127 billion. How can the city of New York have a budget that's greater than the state of Florida, which I think has our third largest population in the country? And here, it's clearly, this budget is, why we need to on experience, maybe we can quibble about that word, but this is a budget that has no cost savings. It relies on vague savings rather than true belt tightening. And to think about it, that, driving away talent, because Eric and yourself were right, Your Honor, that the wealthiest 1% of our city are just going to go somewhere to a state like Texas or Florida that has no sales tax. Anywhere in this country, they're going to be ignoring the savings, and the burden of their lost revenues to the coffers of the city of New York and the state of New York are going to fall on a smaller group of individuals, a group of individuals that are less able to pay for all these failed services and failed policies.
That's exactly right. And by the way, I just want to add, for the record here, and this is kind of inside baseball amongst lawyers and estate planners. There's an estate tax in the state of New York, and the way the estate tax is framed, not only do you have to pay a federal estate tax, but you also have to pay a state tax. And they go back to $1 after you hit a certain dollar amount, so that it's very punitive to die in the state of New York. So anybody knows anything about the law of trust and estates, whether you're a trust and estates lawyer or you're a tax planner, estate planner, a lot of people at a certain age, the most productive people, the higher earners, the people with the resources and assets to support the cultural and the charitable institutions, the educational institutions, the hospitals, the businesses, a lot of them leave just because they want to avoid this punitive estate tax. People are never talking about that, but that's the elephant in the room for people to understand that. You don't need to add one more economic disincentive to keep people from fleeing. You need to get people to stay and to come in here. You have to replenish the economic base. When you have hundreds of thousands of people in the last numbers of years fleeing the state of New York, that's dangerous. When you have, I think the numbers of a couple of million people have fled in the last 10 to 12 years. This is serious business. And when you lose population, you lose the economic development, the jobs, the taxes. And you also lose as Jesse has always pointed out, you lose representation in Congress, because every time you lose population, you're going to lose members of the House. The more members of the House you lose, the less power and clout you have. The clout you need to have in Washington to get a fair share of the federal budget. So these all hang together, and whether this is a definitive plan, a calculated plan, or just ineptitude, or a combination of both, or ideology trumping common sense. Whatever the reason is, this is an economic disaster. This is Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia, the Republican Party, noted commentator, attorney, essayist Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Please stay with us. We'll be back in but a few moments with more important, interesting conversation for our last segment in this week's show. Stay with us.
Let the Record Show with Judge Richard Weinberg,
Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia,
and essayist and commentator Eric Levine on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We're back on Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia, the Republican Party, noted attorney, commentator, essayist Eric Levine, and I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. This is our final segment of this week's show. I want to raise two issues with you, gentlemen. Number one, there was a meeting today at the White House, the so-called Board of Peace. And second, during that meeting, the president was called out to, it is reported, to deal with some situations involving Iran and what's going to happen with Iran. So let me just offer the following thoughts, and I'll turn it over first to Eric, then to Jesse. My thought is that this Board of Peace is very problematic. Some characterize it as a way of supplanting an ineffective and dangerous United Nations. It fundamentally puts people in decision-making or recommendation authority who are not friends of the United States, who are not friends of Western civilization, certainly not friends of the people in the state of Israel. And I mean Qatar, and I mean Turkey, and I mean Pakistan. So I'm very concerned about them being on this at all. It's also, by the way, notable that neither France or England is a member of that institution. And that institution is meant to survive the Trump presidency, with Trump being the chair of this board in perpetuity. So that I'm not a big fan of this board. And let me just say a couple of words about Iran, and then I turn it over to Eric and Jesse. Iran. We have to, and we've talked about this. Jesse's raised the point, Eric's raised the point, I've raised the point. Iran is a clear existential threat to Western civilization. We've never been closer in the 47 years of this dictatorship, this terror regime, this Islamist, fundamentalist theocracy, which oppresses its own people, has killed people by the tens of thousands in its latest resistance movement against it, who's created terrorist organizations all over the Middle East that have infiltrated Europe and in the United States. They're an existential threat to world peace and to Western civilization. They have to be stopped. Trump's got to do something. He has a moral obligation to protect the people who rose up when he kept saying, I have your back. Help is on its way. The aircraft carriers are there. The defensive mechanisms are supposed to be in place to protect our people. We have to act. There is no deal in terms of cutting back on a so-called nuclear program that you can trust. And more important, there's never a deal that will last after a post-Trump administration, because if the Democrats come back to power, they will just renege on it, and the Islamists will continue to control that country. Eric.
Yeah, but even controlling the nuclear, even if the Iranians are saying that the only thing they're willing to talk about is the nuclear program, and then even there, the only question is how much, for them, the negotiation is how much enrichment can they do inside Iran as opposed to outside Iran. But the red lines that Trump has drawn, and they're the correct red lines, no enrichment, period, end of sentence. The end of it, you have to dismantle your ballistic missile program, and you can no longer fund your terrorist network around in the region and around the world. So for the Iranian regime to agree to any of that is basically the end of the Iranian regime, and they've been very clear that they will not even negotiate those points. So there is no deal to be made, period, of end of sentence. And I think Trump understands that. So to the extent that there's been concern, I know, Richard, you've spoken about this, and it's not misplaced, but I think it about the delay in the American response. the question is whether or not who's been playing for time. Is it the Iranians or the United States? You have to have the assets in the region to be able to have an effective military action. And so as of now, finally, there is the most U.S. air power in the Middle East since 2003 invasion of Iraq. And that's quite significant. We're not contemplating boots on the ground, so we don't need the same number of troops. But we have the most air power in the Middle East since 2003. That says something. You don't move all those assets to that region just for making a point. They're there for a purpose. So the question then becomes, if we do attack, then what kind, how fierce will the attack be? I think it's going to be ferocious. Again, you don't put all those assets out there just for a pinprick. I think you need to decapitate the regime. You need to take out the Ayatollah. You need to take out the mullahs and the hierarchy. You need to eviscerate and eliminate the IRGC. You need to take out their Navy. You need to take out their Air Force. And the initial wave must be awesome and overwhelming, because the Iranians are going to fight back. There are going to be casualties on our side, particularly in Israel, because that's where they're going to focus their attack, on Israeli citizens and American military bases and service members in Iraq or Syria and around the Middle East. That's where those initial attacks are going to come. So we really need to be, in the first wave of attacks, overwhelming in taking out the Iranian ability to respond. But I do want to say, in terms of timing, it's now Thursday, February 19th. I think it's very possible by the time the show goes to air, Saturday at 4, certainly by Sunday or so early next week, that the attack will have begun. And if it does, I think in a certain way, Mark Twain will be shown to be right again. And he made the observation, history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. So everybody knows there's a common theme to most Jewish holidays. And that common theme is, they came to kill us, they failed, let's eat. And the holiday that probably exemplifies that the most is the holiday of Purim. And Purim is coming on March 2nd. So what is Purim? So in the 4th century BCE, the king of Persia, King Ahasuerus' primary advisor, a fellow by the name of Haman, was insulted by the leader of the Jewish community in Persia, Mordecai. And Haman was so appalled that he went to the king and he persuaded the king, we must eliminate the Jews in Persia. They're a disrespectful lot. And the king said, oh, okay. But what Haman didn't know was that Ahasuerus' wife, King Ahasuerus of Persia, his wife was Queen Esther. He didn't know.
She's a nice Jewish girl.
But she had not revealed that she was Jewish, because she wanted to marry the king. Mordecai, but even more incestuous, it turns out that Esther was Mordecai's niece. So Mordecai, the Jew that insulted Haman allegedly, goes to Esther and says, you got to save us. So Esther thinks about it for a while. She prays, she ponders on it. She says, you're right, I have to do that. She reveals to the king, King Ahasuerus, her husband, that she is in fact Jewish, and that Haman wants to not, if you kill all the Jews, you have to kill me too. So Ahasuerus, love wills out, determines that I'm going to save the Jews, and I'm going to hang Haman instead. So Haman, who thought he was putting in motion the demise of the Jews in Persia, actually put in motion his own demise. Much like the October 7th attack by Hamas, with the support and direction and funding by Iran, the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel, everyone thought was put in motion to bring about the end of Israel and the extermination of the Jews. It turns out that attack on October 7th, as horrific and grotesque as you can ever imagine it was actually the beginning of the end of Iran and the Iranian regime and the Ayatollah. And I do think that there's going to be a certain symmetry here, that this attack, if it doesn't occur this weekend, if it occurs on March 2nd, the anniversary of the holiday of Purim, what could be better? What could be more symmetrical?
Well,
what could be more rhyming than that?
Well, let me just add this one personal note, then I turn it over to Jesse. March 2nd happens to be my birthday, and I couldn't think of a better birthday present. Jesse, your thoughts?
We've always spoken on this show, even though to our consternation about delays, that something was imminent, that this President Trump, keeps and holds his cards very close to his chest when it comes to these type of military actions. We saw that in the first attack upon Iran's nuclear assets with Israel, when there were some similar talks or light talks going on, and then in the shock and awe, Israel and the United States took action against this regime. As we are taping this, and possibly while this is airing on Saturday and Sunday morning, that their action may have already commenced against Iran. But if you look at it, just to remind our listeners that the president was receiving military briefings as late as Wednesday and Thursday. He was also being briefed by his envoy Witkoff and his son-in-law Jared Kushner, who were doing indirect talks with Iran. And right now, all our assets are there. I think that by the taping of this show, the USS carrier Gerald R. Ford will be in full position at that point, and that is probably the most advanced military asset in our stable. The Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier group is already there, along with a number of air wings that have been poised to do what they need to do and to provide air support. And of course, various other destroyers are in the air, like the USS Roosevelt, the Buckley, the USS Delbert D. Black, and others. So I think that this is classic Trump. This is classic Trump, where he will use diplomacy first, but all the while he is ready to back up his red line stance very clearly with American U.S. military force. And any time the military goes into any action, you want to have overwhelming force. We've seen that in several campaigns since the 1990s under President George H.W. Bush in the Middle East. So I think that I believe and see that a lot of things have correlated to the first attack on Iran, and that finally, with all things being set, that the president is prepared and maybe has already made the decision that he will take action. He needs to rid this our society and this threat from our Western society, from the landscape, by wiping out this regime. So, I think sometimes it's tough to have patience, but this is the best way and the best plan to move forward with it. And I think this president's demonstrated his ability to back up his words with true might, and that is, of course, the men and women of the American U.S. Armed Forces.
Well, I want to close out this show today by saying I always pray for peace. I don't want to see any of our folks or any of our allies hurt or injured.
But sometimes the best way to save lives is to go to war.
But sometimes there's such a thing. The Catholic Church and the papal and encyclicals talk about a concept called just war. If you weren't willing to fight to defend freedom against oppression and dictatorship, then the Nazis would have won, the communists would have won. We can't allow the Islamists to win. This is not an attack against the people who are Muslims or who are peace-loving, decent people. It's against the people, the hegemonic regimes who want to impose their values at the point of the sword against every other group. And if you don't do it their way, they will exterminate you. That's what we're talking about. Not attack. Let's be very clear. There's not attack about the religion. We're talking about radical, fanatical, fringe, but who seem to be guiding this forward. We do not want war. We want peace. There's no reason for the people of Iran to have suffered these 47 years. There's no reason why terrorist attacks have been going on all across the world from these Islamist fundamentalists all these many years. Now is the time for strong action. I just saw a report as we were chatting amongst ourselves that apparently, to Eric's point, to Jesse's point, this is a buildup that's been going on now for weeks and weeks and weeks, and the preparation is a recognition that this is not going to be an overnight success. They're preparing for what could be weeks of a war against the regime. This has been Let the Record Show with Chairman Garcia, attorney, commentator, essayist Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg, and as always, God bless you. God bless your families. God bless America. Let's pray for an end of this threat to Western civilization.
And keep our troops safe.
And keep our troops safe. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Eric. And thank you, audience, for listening. We'll be back with you next week on our next Let the Record Show. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Let the Record Show with Judge Weinberg, Chairman Jesse Garcia, and Eric Levine. You can hear Let the Record Show Sunday mornings at 6. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and busts. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.